The year is 1942, and the Pacific Ocean burns with the wreckage of American ships while European beaches run red with Allied blood. Young black men crowd recruitment offices across America, their eyes burning with the same fierce patriotism that drives their white countrymen, their hands raised in oath to defend a nation that refuses to see them as equals. They come from sharecropper fields in Mississippi, factory floors in Detroit, and street corners in Harlem, desperate to prove their worth in the crucible of global war. But the United States Navy has other plans for them. Plans that involve mops and kitchens, laundry rooms and mess halls, anything to keep them far from the glory of combat. The official policy is clear and coldly bureaucratic. Negro sailors are restricted to the steward's branch, serving food and shining shoes for white officers who barely acknowledge their existence. No black man will fire a naval gun in anger. No black sailor will stand watch on a destroyer's bridge. No person of color will taste the honor of defending their country in battle. The admirals in Washington speak of tradition and unit cohesion, of maintaining order and preserving the fighting spirit of the fleet. But in the eyes of every black recruit scrubbing another deck while war rages across two oceans, the truth burns like acid. Their blood is deemed worthy enough to spill, just not worthy enough to spill in combat. On bases across the segregated South, these invisible sailors watch newsreels of white Marines storming Pacific atolls and white soldiers marching through North Africa. They hear the thunder of naval bombardments they will never fire, see the medals pinned on chests they can never hope to earn. Their letters home speak of frustration that borders on rage, of talented men reduced to servants, of warriors forced to wear the uniform of bellhops. The irony cuts deeper than any enemy blade. America fights fascism abroad while practicing apartheid at home, preaching freedom while denying it to millions. Yet something is stirring in the desperate mathematics of total war, a calculation that will soon reshape everything these men thought possible about their place in this fight. The Navy is bleeding, drowning in failures it cannot afford. And sometimes desperation opens doors that prejudice has welded shut. Sometimes survival demands the unthinkable. The raids come first as whispers from the Atlantic, then as body counts that can no longer be hidden from the American public. British commandos lie dead on the beaches of Dieppe, their bodies tangled in barbed wire and German obstacles that turned the shallow waters into killing fields where thousands drowned before ever reaching sand. Canadian troops float face down, among twisted metal hedgehogs and concrete tetrahedrons, their blood mixing with salt water as machine gun fire from clifftop bunkers cuts through landing craft like paper. Intelligence officers in London stare at reconnaissance photographs showing Hitler's Atlantic Wall stretching from Norway to Spain, every mile bristling with mines, obstacles, and fortifications designed to turn any invasion into a slaughter. The admirals finally speak the truth they've been avoiding. Without specialized units capable of clearing underwater defenses, the liberation of Europe will drown before it begins. In the Pacific theater, the mathematics of failure grow equally brutal as Marines wade through chest-deep water toward Japanese-held islands, exposed and helpless against withering fire from hidden positions. Tarawa becomes a name spoken in hushed horror, a place where the ocean turned crimson and transport ships grounded on unexpected reefs, forcing men to walk hundreds of yards through killing zones with no cover except the bodies of their fallen brothers. Navy planners spread maps across tables in Pearl Harbor, their fingers tracing island chains that must be taken one bloody atoll at a time, each requiring amphibious assaults against enemies who have studied every approach and mined every channel. The conclusion arrives with the weight of mathematical certainty. America needs men willing to swim into darkness ahead of invasion forces, to map enemy defenses and destroy underwater obstacles while exposed and alone. The concept sounds simple in Washington briefing rooms, but transforms into nightmare when spoken aloud. Combat swimmers carrying explosives into defended waters, operating in near-zero visibility while enemy positions rain fire from above. Traditional Navy divers work in deep water with heavy equipment and surface support, but this mission requires something unprecedented. Men who can function as both underwater demolition experts and frontline combat troops in conditions designed to kill them. The survival rate for such operations hovers somewhere between slim and non-existent, the kind of mathematics that makes recruitment officers nervous and chaplains busy. But desperation makes strange bedfellows, and the Navy's personnel crisis has reached critical mass as casualties mount and qualified volunteers grow scarce. Someone in the chain of command asks the question that changes everything. What about the thousands of capable men already in uniform, the ones currently restricted to support roles, the black sailors who keep volunteering for combat despite every rejection? The suggestion lands like a grenade in the segregated command structure, but the ticking clock of war doesn't care about tradition. The memorandum arrives without fanfare, a single sheet of paper that crosses the desk of Lieutenant Commander Draper Kaufman, with the weight of history disguised as bureaucratic efficiency. The words remain carefully neutral, clinical even, proposing the recruitment of Negro volunteers for experimental underwater demolition training with the same tone used for requisitioning equipment or scheduling maintenance. But Kaufman reads between the typed lines and understands the unspoken calculation. If the survival rates prove as catastrophic as projected, better to sacrifice men the Navy considers expendable than risk the political fallout of dead white sailors in a program many admirals expect to fail. He stares at the document until the words blur, knowing he holds either an opportunity for justice or a death sentence wrapped in military euphemism. And the distinction depends entirely on how these 40 men choose to prove their worth. The selection process begins at bases across the segregated South, where black sailors serve in mess halls and engine rooms, their talents deliberately wasted in roles that keep them invisible and safely distant from any glory. Recruitment officers deliver the pitch with practiced vagueness, seeking volunteers for hazardous duty without specifying details, watching faces for reactions that separate the desperate from the determined. They describe training that will break most men, missions that offer no guarantees beyond exhaustion and danger, acceptance into a program where failure means death and success brings no promise of recognition. Some sailors walk away immediately, smart enough to recognize a suicide mission dressed in opportunity's clothing. Others step forward with eyes that have already calculated the odds and chosen to roll the dice anyway. Men tired of proving their courage to a country that refuses to see them. The 40 who report to Fort Pierce arrive expecting prejudice, but discover something worse. A training facility where their presence offends both tradition and comfort, where white officers debate openly whether Negroes possess the intelligence for demolition work or the courage for combat operations. They stand in formation while instructors circle like sharks, searching for weakness and finding only determination that makes the hatred burn hotter. These men come from different cities and backgrounds, but they share the particular fury of Americans told their sacrifice isn't wanted, even as their country bleeds. They exchange glances that need no words, a silent agreement passing between them like electricity. They will not fail, not because the Navy expects success, but because failure would doom every black sailor who dreams of serving beyond the limitations of skin. The training begins before dawn, with instructors who make no secret of their hope that these 40 will quit, that nature will correct what they consider Washington's mistake. Cold Atlantic water becomes their classroom as they learn to swim in full gear through darkness and surf that punishes hesitation with drowning. Explosives training happens with minimal safety margin, the instructors offering abbreviated explanations while watching for the inevitable mistakes that will justify ending this experiment. But the men absorb every lesson with concentration, born from understanding that their performance carries weight beyond individual survival, that they swim, not just for themselves, but for every black, a man in uniform, denied the chance to prove his worth in combat. The physical torment begins each morning when darkness still blankets the Florida coast and continues without mercy until their bodies become living testaments to exhaustion that transcends normal human limits. Instructors drive them into the surf until hypothermia turns their lips blue and their hands shake too violently to grip the rubber boats they must carry overhead, through obstacle courses designed to break bones and spirit simultaneously. They learn to assemble demolition charges with frozen fingers while sergeants scream corrections inches from their faces, hot breath and cold contempt mixing in the pre-dawn air. White trainees in adjacent camps whisper that the Negro unit receives twice the punishment and half the instruction, a deliberate sabotage disguised as equal treatment. But the 40 men refuse to acknowledge the injustice aloud, understanding that complaints become ammunition for those who want them to fail. So they absorb every brutal lesson and return each morning ready to endure whatever fresh torment awaits. The racism manifests in countless small cruelties that accumulate like stones in their pockets, weighing them down during marches that already demand everything they possess. Separate barracks mean inferior equipment and longer distances to training sites, adding miles to days already measured in suffering. The mess hall serves them last with portions noticeably smaller than what white sailors receive, a petty theft of calories that matters desperately when their bodies burn through thousands daily. Some instructors deliberately provide incorrect information during explosives training, then rage at their predictable mistakes with threats to wash them out for incompetence. One recruit named Johnson catches the deception and quietly corrects his team before anyone triggers a premature detonation, his sharp mind saving lives while the instructor who tried to sabotage them watches with fury that cannot quite mask grudging surprise at intelligence he refused to acknowledge. The breaking point arrives during Hell Week, when sleep deprivation and constant physical punishment reveal the core of each man's character beneath the flesh that screams for mercy. They stand in the surf zone for hours, while instructors time the intervals between waves, forcing them back into the water whenever someone's knees buckle, toward rest that remains perpetually out of reach. Several men collapse completely, their bodies surrendering to demands that exceed human tolerances, and medics drag them to sick bay while officers mark their names with the satisfaction of expectations confirmed. But 37 remain standing when dawn finally breaks on the 6th day. Their is hollowed by exhaustion, but burning with something the instructors cannot extinguish no matter how much cruelty they apply. They have survived training designed to destroy them, and in that survival, they become something new, something the Navy never intended to create. The intelligence photographs arrive in a manila envelope sealed with red wax, and when Commander Roberts spreads them across the briefing table, the 37 men who survived Hell Week understand immediately that their training was merely preparation for something far worse. Aerial reconnaissance reveals a stretch of Norman coastline transformed into a fortress of steel and concrete, where German engineers have constructed an underwater labyrinth of obstacles designed to rip the hulls from landing craft and drown American soldiers before they can reach French sand. Massive steel hedgehogs rise from the surf like prehistoric monsters, their welded beams angled to gut boats at high tide. Wooden stakes topped with mines create forests of instant destruction. In the shallows, while concrete tetrahedrons form geometric barriers that funnel invasion forces into predetermined kill zones where machine gun fire waits with mathematical precision. The photographs show a beach that appears impossible to assault, and the silence in the briefing room grows heavier as each man calculates the odds of surviving. What must somehow be destroyed Roberts speaks with the clinical detachment of officers who send men toward death from the safety of distant command posts, explaining that 30,000 Wehrmacht troops occupy fortified positions along this single sector of coastline. His pointer traces lines across the map where artillery batteries command overlapping fields of fire, where patrol boats maintain constant vigilance, where searchlights can turn night into lethal day within seconds. The German defenses represent years of preparation by military engineers who understood that this beach would eventually become a battlefield, and they have spent those years perfecting methods of killing anyone foolish enough to approach. Intelligence estimates suggest the obstacles must be cleared within a specific window when tide and darkness align, a brief opening measured in hours when the invasion's success or catastrophic failure will be determined. No one mentions that previous demolition attempts along other coastal sectors resulted in complete casualties, those missions becoming footnotes in classified reports that families never read. The mission parameters sound simple when Roberts outlines them, his voice steady as he describes swimming toward fortified positions while carrying enough explosives to level buildings. They will approach in darkness, navigate through minefields, by touch and training, plant charges on obstacles, while German soldiers hunt them with weapons and searchlights, then detonate everything simultaneously to create gaps for the invasion force. He does not acknowledge that the 37 men before him were selected partially because their deaths would generate fewer questions than white casualties, though everyone in the room understands this unspoken calculation. Someone coughs in the back row, a sound that breaks the silence without relieving the tension that makes breathing feel like work. They came through training that tried to kill them, and now they face a mission designed without expectation of survival. Yet not one man requests reassignment when Roberts asks if anyone wants to withdraw, their silence becoming affirmation that transforms them from trainees into something history will struggle to define. They have already proven themselves against instructors who wanted them broken, and now they will prove themselves against an enemy who simply wants them dead, a distinction that feels almost liberating in its honesty. The pre-dawn hours of June 5, 1944, arrive with the weight of predetermined fate, and the 37 men gather in a Quonset hut that smells of salt air and gun oil, while rain hammers against corrugated metal with rhythms that sound like distant artillery. They check equipment with hands that refuse to tremble, despite knowing what sunrise will bring, testing waterproof fuse igniters and adjusting demolition packs that contain enough explosive power to vaporize a man if improperly handled. Jenkins methodically applies black grease paint to his face, transforming his features into something spectral and unrecognizable, while Washington beside him wraps tape around metal buckles that might reflect moonlight and draw German fire. The ritual of preparation becomes meditation, each small action delaying the moment when they must walk toward waiting transport vessels and the channel crossing that precedes their appointment with fortified beaches. Someone produces a battered photograph of a woman holding a child, studying it with intensity that suggests memorization rather than remembrance, then carefully seals it in a waterproof pouch against his chest, where it will stay regardless of what happens next. The trucks arrive precisely on schedule, their engines idling with mechanical indifference as officers bark orders that sound hollow against the magnitude of what these men have been asked to accomplish. They board in silence, shoulder to shoulder in canvas-covered beds that offer no protection from rain or the deeper cold that comes from understanding how morning will unfold. The convoy moves through English countryside, still sleeping in the comfortable ignorance of civilians who will wake to news without comprehending the cost of its creation, past hedgerows that blur in darkness, and villages where windows remain dark behind blackout curtains. Roberts rides in the lead vehicle, his posture rigid with responsibilities that commanders carry differently than the men they send toward defended shores, and when the convoy reaches the embarkation point, he steps out first, as though leading rather than directing. The harbour spreads before them, filled with more vessels than any man present has ever seen. A fleet that represents the largest amphibious operation in human history, and somewhere in that vastness are the landing craft that will carry them across the channel toward France, and everything waiting there. The demolition team transfers to a modified patrol boat designed for speed rather than armor. Its deck barely large enough to hold 37 men, and their equipment as engines rumble to life with vibrations that travel through boot soles. Into nervous systems already charged with adrenaline, they cast off as rain begins to ease, leaving behind the relative safety of English waters for the channel crossing that will take hours, measured in heartbeats and unanswered prayers. The coastline recedes into darkness behind them, while ahead lies nothing but black water and eventually a beach, transformed into a killing ground by enemy engineers who never imagined black American sailors would be the ones coming to dismantle their carefully constructed death traps. Some men check their equipment again, though nothing has changed since the last inspection, the repetitive action providing comfort that words cannot, while others simply stare at the deck or the invisible horizon where dawn and destiny wait with equal certainty. The boat's wake spreads white against dark water as they push deeper into the channel, and Jenkins finds Washington's eyes across the crowded deck, exchanging a look that contains everything language fails to express about brotherhood, forged in training and about to be tested in fire. No one speaks of the odds or the intelligence estimates that suggest most of them will not survive to see the invasion force they are clearing the way for, because such calculations become meaningless when you have already committed to swimming toward fortress beaches while carrying explosives and the weight of proving your worth to a nation that questions your humanity. The engines drone steadily as miles pass beneath the hull, and gradually the eastern sky begins to lighten with the first suggestion of dawn, that treacherous illumination that will make them visible to German sentries and machine gunners who have spent months preparing for exactly this moment. Roberts checks his watch with movements that seem too casual for the countdown it represents, then gives the signal that means they are approaching the point where the patrol boat can go no further, where the water becomes too shallow and too watched for anything except men willing to swim into history or oblivion. The patrol boat cuts engines 2 miles from the French coast, and suddenly the night becomes so quiet that every man can hear his own pulse hammering against eardrums as they prepare to enter water that feels less like ocean and more like the liquid threshold between existence and extinction. Roberts gives hand signals in the darkness, unnecessary because each man knows his assignment with the certainty that comes from repetition drilled into muscle memory. But the gestures provide final confirmation that what they trained for has arrived. Jenkins leads the first team over the side, slipping into channel water so cold it drives breath from lungs in involuntary gasps, the shock of immersion momentarily overriding fear as bodies adjust to temperature that will sap strength long before they reach the beach. The demolition packs they carry are waterproofed but heavy, weights that transform competent swimmers into men who must fight for every forward yard. And as the patrol boat disappears back toward England, the 37 men begin their approach toward a coastline marked by the faint silhouette of German fortifications against a sky that grows lighter with each passing minute. They swim in formation that spreads them across a quarter-mile of approach vector, maximizing coverage while minimizing the chance that a single German machine gun burst will eliminate multiple team members. The water tastes of salt and fuel oil from ships that have passed through these channels for centuries, never imagining they would one day carry men toward invasion beaches where the future of nations will be decided in hours, measured by casualties rather than clock faces. Washington kicks steadily beside Jenkins, their breathing synchronized from months of training together. neither man speaking because sound carries impossibly far across water at night, and German listening posts dot the shoreline specifically to detect what they are attempting. Gradually, the beach obstacles emerge from the gloom ahead, massive wooden and steel structures planted below the waterline and topped with mines designed to rip open landing craft hulls, and the sight of them transforms abstract mission parameters into concrete reality that must be dismantled one explosive charge at a time. A searchlight suddenly blazes to life from a coastal bunker, its beams sweeping across the water in methodical arcs that turn black ocean silver-white wherever it touches. The swimmers freeze instinctively, knowing that movement attracts eyes more effectively than shape, becoming motionless forms that might be driftwood or debris, rather than men carrying enough explosives to clear an invasion route. The light passes within 20 yards of Jenkins' position, close enough that he can see particles suspended in the beam. Like stars in a narrow universe, then continues its patrol pattern while his heart attempts to break through his ribcage. The moment stretches beyond normal time before the beam moves on, releasing them back into protective darkness, and the team resumes forward progress with renewed urgency because dawn approaches, and with it the absolute certainty of detection. Roberts reaches the first obstacle line and begins attaching charges with hands that work independently of the fear trying to paralyze higher brain functions. His fingers finding attachment points and setting fuses while his mind catalogues the distance to shore, the improving visibility and the mathematical certainty that they will be discovered long before their work is complete. Machine gun fire suddenly rips across the water from a position further north, tracer rounds drawing lines of light above the surface as German sentries engage shadows or phantoms, or perhaps another team that has been spotted. The sound galvanizes every swimmer into faster work, knowing that German alertness has been triggered and that within minutes the entire coastal defense network will be searching for infiltrators with lethal intent. The first explosion comes not from their carefully placed charges, but from a mine detonating against Johnson's chest when a wave pushes him into an obstacle he cannot see in the darkness, and the blast turns water into temporary daylight that reveals every remaining swimmer to the German positions above. Machine gun fire immediately concentrates on the exposed demolition team, bullets striking water with sounds like fabric tearing as tracers draw geometry of death across the surface, while men dive deeper, lungs burning desperately, seeking protection that does not exist beneath waves only 6 feet deep. Washington surfaces gasping to find Johnson simply gone, erased from existence except for debris floating where a man had been swimming seconds before, and the reality that death has finally arrived transforms training discipline into pure survival instinct that must be consciously overridden to continue the mission. Roberts screams orders that barely carry over gunfire and surf, directing teams to finish placing charges, even as German searchlights now pin them in overlapping fields of illumination that make concealment impossible. Thompson takes rounds through his shoulder and thigh, but continues wiring. Detonators with hands that shake from shock rather than fear, his blood clouding the water around him in dark swirls that look black under artificial light. Jenkins reaches him and completes the connection Thompson can no longer manage, their eyes meeting in silent understanding that survival has become secondary to the thousands of soldiers who will land here in hours, men whose lives depend on obstacles being destroyed regardless of what happens to those who plant the explosives. The German fire intensifies as dawn breaks properly across the channel, revealing the full demolition team to defenders who cannot believe the audacity of swimmers working methodically despite casualties, mounting with each passing minute. Martinez goes under after a burst stitches across his back, sinking with his demolition pack still strapped to his chest, and Perry dives to recover both the explosives and his friend's body, because leaving either behind violates bonds stronger than self-preservation. The remaining men work with mechanical, precision born from training that anticipated exactly this chaos, their movements economical and purposeful, while bullets kick up fountains around them, and German voices shout coordinates from bunkers that overlook the killing ground the beach has become. The final charges are set as small arms fire gives way to artillery, shells beginning to fall. Among the obstacles in German desperation to eliminate the demolition threat before invasion forces arrive, Roberts triggers the first detonation sequence, and obstacles disintegrate in rolling thunder that momentarily silences even the German guns, clearing lanes through defenses that have taken months to construct, and the surviving swimmers begin their retreat toward open water, knowing they have traded their brothers for passage that will save thousands they will never meet. The survivors pull themselves aboard the extraction vessel as Allied bombers pass overhead toward German positions, their bodies shaking from hypothermia and shock, while medics work frantically on Thompson and Perry, whose wounds paint the deck in spreading pools that sailors try unsuccessfully to wash away. Roberts counts heads twice because the numbers refuse to make sense, his mind rejecting the mathematics of absence that reduce 40 men to 23. And when he finally accepts the count, his legs buckle beneath him until Washington catches his arm and holds him upright through sheer force of will. The distant thunder of naval bombardment signals the imminent invasion, thousands of landing craft pushing toward beaches now accessible because of obstacles cleared by men whose names appear nowhere in the operational reports being typed aboard command ships. Jenkins sits with Martinez's dog, tags clutched in his fist, salt water and tears indistinguishable on his face, while around him the remaining team members embrace in silence that communicates what words cannot approach. The intelligence officer who debriefs them aboard the command vessel takes notes with mechanical efficiency, his questions focused on obstacle density and German defensive positions rather than casualty details that seem irrelevant to his tactical assessments. Roberts provides information in flat monotone while noticing how the officer never makes eye contact, never acknowledges the blood still caked under fingernails, or the way Thompson's morphine-dulled moans carry through the thin bulkhead walls. When Roberts asks directly about official recognition for the men killed clearing invasion routes, the officer's pen pauses mid-sentence before he explains that operational security requires their mission remain classified, his tone suggesting this conversation has reached boundaries that cannot be crossed. Washington stands abruptly from where he has been listening, his jaw muscles working as he fights down words that would accomplish nothing except his own court-martial, and walks out into morning light that illuminates an armada stretching to the horizon. The invasion proceeds exactly as planned, through lanes the demolition team died to create, landing craft grounding on beaches cleared of obstacles that would have torn hulls apart and drowned soldiers by the hundreds before they fired a single shot. From the extraction vessel's deck, the survivors watch wave after wave of troops pour onto French soil, seeing their mission's success measured in lives saved rather than lives lost. Though this mathematics provides comfort that remains theoretical rather than visceral, Jenkins points toward Omaha Beach, where explosions still flash and tracers arc, his voice rough when he says that 17 men bought passage for what looks like 10,000, and nobody responds because they are all performing the same calculations with answers that satisfy duty while devastating the heart. Roberts gathers his remaining team below deck as the vessel turns toward England, their faces showing exhaustion beyond anything physical, as they process survival that feels less like victory than random selection by forces indifferent to merit or courage. He tells them their mission succeeded completely, that invasion forces encountered minimal obstacle resistance because of their work, and that command has expressed satisfaction with operational outcomes even if official recognition remains impossible. The words sound hollow in the steel compartment, where wounded men fight for breath and healthy men fight against memories already calcifying into trauma. But Roberts continues because Leadership demands performance, even when belief has been shattered by realities that training never mentioned. The decades roll forward like waves erasing footprints from sand, carrying the survivors of that June morning into a peacetime that celebrates victories, while filing away inconvenient truths about who purchased them with blood and anonymity. Roberts returns to Philadelphia, where he works construction jobs that never quite challenge hands trained to manipulate explosives underwater, watching news reports about naval special operations without mentioning that his team wrote the blueprint in darkness off French beaches. Washington settles in Chicago, running a small garage, where he rebuilds engines with the same methodical precision he once applied to placing demolition charges. And sometimes customers notice how his hands shake when planes fly too low overhead, their shadows triggering memories that 40 years have failed to diminish. Jenkins remains in the Navy through 2 more wars, training demolition teams who learn techniques he helped develop, though their instructors never mention the Fort Pierce unit or explain why their tactics manual contains procedures authored by men whose service records remain classified behind security walls that outlast the threats they were built to protect. The first cracks in the silence appear not through official channels, but through families who gather evidence like archaeologists reconstructing vanished civilizations from fragments, children and grandchildren asking questions that survivors initially refused to answer because the words remained buried too long to extrude easily. A daughter finds her father's dog tags alongside ones bearing an unfamiliar name, pressing for explanations, until Washington finally speaks about Martinez and how he carried those tags for 40 years because someone needed to remember. A grandson discovers newspaper clippings about the Navy's experimental demolition program, noticing how photographs show integrated units after 1945, but finding no images of the men who proved the concept before integration became policy rather than dangerous experiment. These families begin connecting across distances that history tried to maintain, sharing stories that align into a narrative official records continue denying, building evidence files that transform whispered family legends into documented facts, demanding acknowledgement. The fight for recognition becomes its own kind of warfare, waged in congressional hearing rooms and archive basements rather than on beaches. Each document retrieved representing territory gained against institutional resistance that protects comfortable narratives about military history and racial progress. Roberts testifies before a Naval Review Board in 1988, his 70-year-old voice still carrying authority when he describes mission details that classified files confirm despite decades of official denial about the unit's existence. The Admiral's listening shift uncomfortably as he names the 17 dead, explaining how their mission directly enabled D-Day's success and established operational concepts the Navy SEALs would inherit 20 years later, his testimony supported by extraction logs and casualty reports that someone failed to properly bury. Washington sits beside him wearing a suit that feels more constraining than any wetsuit, his presence communicating solidarity that transcends words as Roberts methodically dismantles every excuse the Navy offers for continued silence about men who earned recognition that comfort and prejudice conspired to withhold. The official recognition finally arrives in small ceremonies that feel inadequate, measured against decades of erasure, medals presented to survivors and families by officers who acknowledge historical injustices with careful language that avoids assigning institutional blame for choices that cost men their rightful place in history. Roberts accepts his Navy Cross with hands that shake not from age, but from emotions too complex for simple categories like pride or satisfaction, knowing that 17 men deserve to stand here receiving acknowledgement their country finally admits they earned. The ceremony includes a plaque at Fort Pierce listing all 40 names, bronze letters catching sunlight while waves roll against the beach where they trained, and Jenkins touches Martinez's engraved name with fingers that still remember gripping. Those dog tags, while watching dawn break over Normandy, the recognition establishes their official role as founders of naval special operations, their tactics and courage creating the template that SEALs and combat divers would follow, proving that excellence transcends the racial barriers that history required extraordinary men to demolish with. The same determination they brought to underwater obstacles, protecting tyranny's shores. What other forgotten heroes deserve to have their stories finally told? Subscribe to uncover the history that was hidden.